Greetings, traveler.
Hey everyone, Season 10 has been announced, and there is a huge change coming. Normally, we were supposed to get a vanilla meta, according to the cadence that we have been following of getting an additional mechanic, going back into a vanilla meta, having new minions introduced, and then having a new mechanic or an old mechanic returning. Instead of that, we are going to start Season 10 off with Trinkets. So no vanilla meta, we are going straight from anomalies into Trinkets. I think that's really fun. I think vanilla has had its run. I don't think it should never come back, but 2 months of a vanilla meta seems a little bit long when we are used to playing with all these cool extra things like quests, buddies, anomalies, and now Trinkets, which was a super fun mechanic for me, is coming back. Let's look at all the other things that have been revealed so far. First, we have a new hero, Forest Lord Cenarius, and my god, that hero power gives you oil! That's great. Turn 1 oil. So I assumed that there would be some kind of a restriction here where it says, oh, you can only use this on, turn 2 or turn 3 or something. But it doesn't say that. So I have to assume that you can click this button on turn 1. And casting an oil on turn 1 seems pretty good. So maybe I'm just completely misunderstanding how this hero works. But wow, I am pressing that button often and probably going 8th in the process a few times, but this seems like a super fun hero. I've done a little bit of theory crafting where I took my notepad. So yeah, turn 1 we oil, of course, right? So we hero power, we get an extra maximum gold. That means that on turn 2, instead of 4 gold, we have 5 gold. So what's pretty important then is that you try to get a 2-cost spell in your shop. So if you have something like a lasso or recruit a trainee in your shop, I think it's good to just freeze that on turn 1 so that on turn 2 you can hero power again and then buy the 2-cost spell and have a good clean turn. On turn 3, we're already at 7 gold, I believe, right? Because we had 5 gold on turn 2, then we go to 6 gold plus 1 from hero powering again, so we already have 7 gold on turn 3. Now we can hero power again, level, and buy a 1-cost spell. So we are behind other players at this point because other players leveled on turn 2 and they buy 2 drops on turn 3. Whereas you're going to have, let's say, 1 unit on the board that you got with your lasso or your trainee. So you are quite a bit behind on the board. That means that on turn 4, you'll have 9 gold. You can now choose to buy 2 minions in hero power again. You could buy 3 minions if you want to stabilize. You could even level and buy a cart because it will cost you 6 gold to level. You could even level and hero power again if you want some more money. But this is the part where it starts to get a little murky. We're going to have to get some experience to see what works. But I'm pretty confident that at least the first 3 turns, you're going to want a hero power to get that advantage rolling. And then depending on what's in the shop, is it good to level? Is it good to buy? Can you afford to hero power? How much life are you losing? You can start to deviate a little bit. And then on turn 5, if you hero powered again, you should be at 11 maximum gold. At that point, you're so far ahead of everyone in economy that I think it's very important to start to stabilize. So if you went to tier 3, you could hypothetically even buy the whole shop. If you sell your starter unit you got from your lasso, you'll have 12 gold, so you could spend 12 gold buying. You could also buy 3 cards and a 2 gold spell or something like that. At this point, it starts to become really difficult to plan ahead because there's so many variables in terms of, okay, what did I roll? Did I level the previous turn? Is my shop good and all that? But it seems like a super fun hero and intuitively really strong for me. But then again, I do love economy. I like to play super greedy, so that is a weakness of mine. So yeah, but I mean, I will pick this hero every time I get it in the first week for sure. I will want to figure out what is the perfect curve for this guy to go maximum greed. As our second new hero, we have Buttons. It is going to be pretty difficult to compete with free oil, well, not free oil, but turn 1 strike oil, which is a hero power of Cenarius. But Buttons does a pretty good job, honestly. Rarran was a super fun hero to play in the trinket meta. Just having more trinkets is really fun. Same thing as Sire in quest meta, having more quests is really fun. And Buttons gives you an additional greater trinket, which should be more fun than Rarran because the greater trinkets generally have a bigger impact to how you're going to play the game. Lesser trinkets can very often be a little bit of a support thing. You get a little bit of extra gold or slightly extra tempo, this and that. A greater trinket can be very powerful. Now, in return for that, Buttons does have the weakness that he doesn't have a hero power for a long time. So essentially a little bit like a cat. We're going to have to see how much armor button has to support that, because it could be very possible that with other people having a hero power and the lesser trinket, it's a bit too much for buttons to handle and you take a lot of damage. That means that likely you're going to need to take a lesser trinket that is not greedy. So probably not a trip vouchers or probably not a souvenir stand, although that would be extremely fun. And I will definitely try to make a video with that where I have 3 greater trinkets. But probably not the correct strategy. Probably better to take something a little bit more defensive, or not even defensive, but just some money early on so you have some additional resources to defend yourself, because you are going to have turn 8 and turn 9 where you have to spend your money on a greater trinket. So if you're already very low health at that point, it's possible that you just die on the turn, you get your, let's say, second greater trinket, which would not be a lot of fun. Now, in that regard, I think it would be really good if you can set yourself up to go to tier 5 on turn 7. That's the 9 gold turn. And simply because if you have to spend money on turn 8 on a greater trinket, and you have to spend money on turn 9 on a greater trinket, you're unlikely to be able to level on those turns. It's possible some greater trinkets are, a little cheaper, but a lot of them are on the more expensive end. If you have to pay an additional, let's say 4 gold or maybe even 5 gold or so for a greater trinket, it's very difficult to also go to tier 5, because then you have to sell stuff off your board, or at the very least you're doing nothing else but leveling. You're not buying an additional minion or so. So if you can spend turn 7 leveling, then you're on tier 5, you have your greater trinket, and you can spend a little bit of gold on tier 5 minions, and then the next turn, the same thing. Now, again, that's going to be a little bit difficult because you are a bit weaker early on, but hopefully your lesser trinket can compensate enough for that if you make the correct decision. Then we have 2 new trinkets. Your tavern spells that give stats grant an extra 1/1 and 2/2 respectively for the lesser and greater trinket. We are going to see that this is a new style of playing the game where we are enhancing spells, tavern spells in particular, that buff your board. So that's going to be a strategy where we pick up lots of buffs, and then something like an Azerite Empowerment instead of 4/4 could give a lot more than that. It can become a strategy where, we're going to see that Landlubber is back in the game, where you're just rolling for a lot of spells that buff your board, and that's how you scale. That's very difficult to predict how strong that's going to be. That's really one of the things we're going to have to play with and feel like, okay, can this keep up with some of the other strategies people are doing? And then we have Empowerment Portrait. At first glance, this looked a little weak because paying 5 gold for a greater drink to get +4/+4 every turn is not a good deal. However, we've already seen some tavern spell boosting cards, and it's reasonable to assume we'll get some more later on. So having +4/+4 every turn, and then all the additional bonuses like the Humongous on your board, buffing the Divine Shield, that looks pretty nice. Probably not a bad pickup if you already have some tavern spell buffing synergy. As mentioned, we have Landlubber coming back, and you might notice the colors are a little bit off. What's going on here? This is actually a really, really, really cool change they made, and I think it's going to have, good and bad effects or an impact. And here's why. Class colors are now on the cards. Elementals have the same color as Mage. If you have played regular Hearthstone, right? If you've played Arena or Constructed, you see that cards have a color, and Mage's color is blue. Rogue's color is black. Pirates have the Rogue color. Elementals have the Mage color, which makes sense. That's pretty in theme. I like that. Pirate, Rogue, and then Elementals being all spellcasty and stuff. It'll be easier to spot this in the tavern, which I think is fantastic for very new players, because you can now, without feeling completely lost, say, I'm going to pick all the blue cards, or I'm going to pick all the black cards, or I'm going to pick all the whatever cards, and there'll be some kind of synergy. Now, why does that potentially also have a bad consequence? Because the piece of advice I keep giving to people that ask me, hey, how do I, let's say, climb to, past 6,000 MMR, how do I improve this or that? The number one piece of advice is don't commit early into a type. You can have a mix of cards on your board as long as you're keeping your life total up and you have some economy going on. It doesn't really matter if you have a type early. And this goes completely counter to that, because now I think people are going to be even more incentivized to match the color of the board, which again is great for newer players if you're feeling a little lost. But if you want to really push to a higher level, it's important that you don't commit too early into a type, because then the game really becomes a slot machine where you just hit the refresh button and you're looking for blue cards. And, that takes a lot of the agency away. So again, but overall, I think it's a good change. I think it's a cool change. It's just really funny to me because it goes counter to, the main piece of advice I usually give players. Okay, Okay, then we have a new neutral card. It's a choose one, so not a battle cry. It does not stack with Bran. That's important. Your tavern spells that give stats grant an additional +1 attack this game or +1 health. That means that you can play this and then sell it, and it should still have its effect, which is nice. That's just a little extra buff. If you are playing the tavern spell strategy, you can pick this up, but at the same time, it's a 3/4. And this happens quite often with new cards that Blizzard makes. Generally gonna be slightly overstated because it's no fun to make new cards and then have them be so weak that the correct play is to actively avoid the new cards. So in my experience, Blizzard will err a little bit on the side of making something a little bit too strong so that at the very least, if they predicted the power level wrong, it's going to still be an okay card. But that also means that sometimes if they make something slightly too strong and it's actually a lot too strong, you have these new cards that are just completely bonkers, and that does happen. But I think that's a good strategy because we've had that before where there was a new type, and I can't even remember exactly which one it was, but it was so weak on release that it was just better to not buy the new type. And that is so much worse than having OP new stuff, because at least you're actively looking for the new stuff and playing with the new stuff. So I'm totally fine with cards being a little overstated and then they have to scale that back later. That's not to say that the 3/4 is crazy, but that's a nice stat line. You know, you're not too unhappy to put a 3/4 on your board. So, you know, that's fun. Then we have Humongous, Humongous. Humongous. That's a joke from years ago. We have a 5/5 Divine Shield that says your tavern spells that give stats grant an additional 1/2. So you'll notice the difference here that this card does not say for the rest of the game. So it should only be active when it's on your board. It's very convenient that this is a Divine Shield minion, so you actually don't mind keeping it on your board. It's good to buff. That's just a good feeling. That's a fun thing. So if you are going in the direction of the tavern spell buffing, this is just a great card to have on your board. It should stack so you can have multiple of these. You can have a golden, you can have a golden and a regular, you could have 2 goldens, and all of a sudden the spells are adding up quite quickly. Again, an Azerite Empowerment suddenly gives a whole lot more than +4/+4, so really nice to roll that. So maybe you have a Humongous on your board and you have Landlubber, and now it's more likely that you roll these tavern spells that end up buffing. And that's just, you know, that's just a fun thing to do. So I will definitely play around with this. As I said before, it's just difficult to gauge how strong that's going to be compared to someone that has a different build that might have access to more economy, for instance. How good is Bran going to be? Probably still pretty good. Tavern spells generally don't discriminate between types. So you could have a Bran on the board to play a lot of battle cries, to generate more economy, to be able to buy more spells, or even just cards that generate spells. Those are also in the game, so probably pretty good to have a Bran on your board when you're doing this strategy. Then we have Lokolar Frostforger. You'll notice a blue card, right? So that's elementals. At the end of your turn, give your other minions 2/2. This should stack with Drakari. There are likely going to be some kind of way to increase this effectiveness, I'm assuming, because I don't think +2/+2 or with a Drakari +4/+4 is like a whole strategy that you can build your board around. Seems like a powerful minion to triple into early at the very least. So even if there are no additional buffs for this, so let's say you only ever get the 2/2, if you triple into a 5-drop early, so usually that would be say on 8 gold, right? On 8 gold, it is conceivable to level to tier 4 and get a triple, especially if you've had some economy. A little bit more difficult with trinkets, but let's move that aside. Let's assume you picked a very cheap trinket and you still do that. That's pretty good, right? Now you're getting +2/+2 on your board early. It's just that later in the game, when you know you're scaling with something that can trigger many more times per turn, because this is limited to end of turn, so you get 2/2 and a Drakari 4/4, that's generally not going to cut it. So really good early, and if there is a way to increase the effectiveness, maybe you can keep this on your board and just build around it. But regardless, should be a nice tempo option to pick up early, especially if you've had a lot of economy. So you have a pretty wide board. Let's say there's at least 5 other minions on your board. That's +10/+10 for not doing anything. That's really going to help you level because you don't have to spend any money to get stronger. Then we also have a new spell, High Tea Service. It costs 3 gold, but it refreshes the tavern with tier 5 cards. So whenever a spell refreshes, or whenever a minion refreshes, you generally can subtract 1 gold already from the cost because you don't have to click the refresh button. So for effectively 2 gold, we get a whole tavern for tier 5 cards. Now that's still a little expensive, so I don't think you just want to buy that from the shop every time you see it. But I think if you power level to tier 5, that is definitely worth it, because now you get a whole shop full of 5 drops. That's really nice. And I think this is also a really good card to take from, say, a rodeo performer. If you're playing with Bran, then you get High Tea Service. You can then use the High Tea Service, try to triple your brand, try to get another rodeo, and just it seems like a really fun APM spell to throw into the mix when you're already having a good turn. And with that, we have revealed our last card so far. What do you guys think about the change? Do you like that we're going straight into trinkets from anomalies, or would you have preferred a vanilla meta? I really enjoyed trinkets, so I like this change, but I know that tastes can differ. Please let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video.